The list of broken champions that have existed throughout League's history seems to get longer with every patch. There have been many champions that were clearly unbalanced, and sometimes these issues can be fixed simply by changing their numbers. In other cases though, some champions seem to be broken in their design. This video is about one of those champions, specifically the most banned champion across all World Tournaments in League's history, Kalista. Kalista launched in 2014, and to say that Riot has had a hard time balancing her is an understatement. To be fair, there are plenty of champions that Riot has had a tough time getting right. Kalista, though, is different. Kalista is one of 2 champions in League's history to be banned in every game of a World Tournament main event. Yes, every game. In 2017, Kalista had a 100% ban rate. The only time she was actually played in the tournament was during the play-ins. She was picked 5 times and won 4 of those games. Kalista wasn't just a problem for one tournament though. She completely dominated pro play and was near impossible to balance in any way for solo queue. Just how much of a problem was Kalista? Well, during the LPL 2015 summer split, there were 264 games played in total. How many of those games do you think Kalista actually appeared in? Well, if you guessed every single one of them, you're right. Yes, that is a real statistic. She was banned in 237 of those matches and picked in the other 27. And of those, she won 70%. Today, she is the most banned champion across all World Tournament main events with 230 bans in total. Next to that is Syndra with 219 bans, and then Alistar and Lucian with 190. Keep in mind that by the time Kalista had even released, there had been 4 World Tournaments. That means that Alistar had 99 bans and Zed had 71 when Kalista still had 0. Kalista started the race behind almost 100 bans over a 4-year period and still somehow took the lead. So how is it that Kalista has had such an impact? She has the title of most banned champion at Worlds. What went so wrong that Kalista dominated the pro scene to this extent? Why has she been so hard to balance to this day? This video is going to answer those questions and cover the story of Kalista.
We are vengeance.
But first, let me introduce you to the sponsor of this video and my internet browser of choice, Opera GX. Web browsers are often boring. Opera GX's mission is to make internet browsers fun, and they have achieved exactly that. Opera GX is designed to be extremely customizable with a huge amount of mods available for you to download. This is easily my favorite feature because they actually have official mods made in collaboration with Riot Games based around League's champions, like this Lee Sin mod. With one click, you can install it and automatically apply all of its features. You get this animated background and an updated theme to match. That's not all though, there are custom sounds which you can toggle on or off for doing things like opening or closing tabs. There's even custom sounds for when you type. The Lee Sin mod sounds like he's running through the jungle about to tower dive me. This makes me type faster because it triggers a fear response. The Renekton one sounds like my top laner just went 0-10 and now he's running it down mid lane. I feel right at home. The font, the icons, and even the browser icon itself are all customizable, and you can swap these mods around anytime by using the sidebar. With anything this customizable, someone who plays games is going to want to know how much of their system's resources are being used. Well, since Opera GX is designed for gamers, they've already thought of that. Using GX control from anywhere in the browser will allow you to set exactly how much of your resources you'd like it to use. This way you can keep your sites for champion builds open, also look up your team on Professor, as well as listen to any videos you might want without having to worry about lowered performance. It even includes a network limiter, so you don't have to worry about lagging either. Everyone knows how important communication is in League. Well, Opera GX integrates Discord and many other messengers into the browser itself. This way, all of your messages and chats are in one easy-to-access place. They also have integration with AI, allowing you to access whichever tools you want, like searching for related content or summarizing long articles. If you'd like to try out Opera GX and use one of the official League-themed mods, use my download link below. Thank you again to Opera GX for supporting the channel, and let's jump back to the video. Kalista's kit was very unique, and it had a lot going on. Every game, Kalista started with an item called Black Spear. She could use it to link to an allied champion. This would allow unique interactions and effects related to these 2 champions only, such as the ability for Kalista to use her ultimate. Her passive made it so that Kalista could not cancel her basic attacks, and clicking in any direction while attacking would make her hop in that direction. When she hopped backwards, she also gained extra distance. This definitely won't be a balanced nightmare. Her Q would throw a spear forward that dealt damage and applied the effect of both her W and E skills, which we'll talk about next. She could also dash after using it, just like her auto attacks. If Q killed an enemy that had stacks of her E on it, it would apply all stacks to the next enemy struck. Spoiler, her E can stack infinitely. Kalista's W passive made it so that if her and her soulbound ally both attacked the same enemy within a small period of time, they dealt bonus damage to that target, and also applied a stack of her E. And that bonus damage was 12% of a target's maximum health at rank 1, scaling to 20%.
Right, yeah. Course.
The active part of her W sent out a sentinel to patrol the area until it expired, granting vision in front of it. When triggered, it followed the enemy. Her E made it so that every basic attack lodged a spear in her target. They could stack on multiple targets at once, and they scaled infinitely. They would eventually fall off if Kalista didn't attack the enemy within a few seconds. When Kalista activated her E, she dealt damage to all enemies with spears in them and slowed them. The damage increased for every spear that was lodged in the target. Incredible mobility, the likes of which the game had never seen before, and also an infinitely stacking mechanic, which was better at securing objectives than anything else in the game. Thank you, Riot Games. We still aren't done talking about her E though. If any enemy was killed by her E, the cooldown was immediately reset. The next patch also made it so that if she killed a unit with her E, she refunded 20 mana up to twice per cast. So using it to last hit and harass in lane was essentially free. Finally, Kalista's ultimate. When cast, she pulls her soulbound ally to her, making them untargetable. Then, the ally could right-click to launch in any direction, causing an AoE knockup, for 2 seconds at max rank. Kalista's ultimate is probably one of the best engage tools in the entire game. Pair that with any engage support, like Rakan, that also has their own engage tools, and this is what you get. You're probably expecting me to start off by saying that Kalista released and was obviously overpowered and dominated the game right from the start. Well, that's not what happened. The community's initial thoughts on Kalista's strength in solo queue was very mixed. Her win rate was under 40% when she released. Some players felt that Kalista was simply a garbage champion. That's why, just a few weeks after her release, Riot began buffing Kalista. The patch notes for the following patch are incredible to look back on, and they provide some subtle foreshadowing. They said, whether you think she's the second coming of Beta Twisted Fate, or just another marksman in the crowd, it's clear to us that Kalista needs a bit of love to reach her full potential. It has to be mentioned here that this is one of those rare times in the League community where the player base seemed to actually agree on something. Kalista was going to be broken in professional play. This is because she was clearly going to be extremely strong with coordination, and she would need to be balanced around that strength. This also meant that she would naturally be worse in solo queue, where there would be way less communication, or more realistically, no communication at all. There are quite a few champions like this in League, and it's worth noting another champion known for this, Azir, had just released 2 months prior. Before that was Gnar, and before that was Braum. I think that there might be a trend here. This is why everyone was surprised to see even more Kalista buffs in the next patch, 5.1. Speaking of pro play, let's fast forward to the 2015 spring season of the LCS. Were things really as bad as they seemed? Was Kalista the nightmare that everyone expected? Well, no. Kalista had a 40% overall presence. She wasn't in the top 10 most banned champions, or even close to the top 10 in picks. I mean, Lissandra had an 86% presence and a 73% win rate. But during this time, Riot actually nerfed Kalista. Twice, in patch 5.4 and in patch 5.9. One nerf was to how her attack animation scaled with attack speed, and the other removed the 25% additional range she covered when leaping backwards, which was a ridiculous thing to have in the first place. Based on these nerfs, it's clear that Riot was realizing that Kalista was going to be a problem, and they had started making changes to avoid an eventual disaster. Would these changes be enough? Based on the time left in this video, you already know the answer. During the 2015 LPL summer season, Kalista was played in 27 games. Not bad, right? 27 games out of 264 total games in the season. Well, she was only played in 27 because she was banned in the other 237. For all my fellow junglers out there who struggle to count past the number of fingers they have, this means Kalista was picked or banned in all 264 games, giving her a 100% presence. And of the 27 games where she wasn't banned, she won 70%. During Champions Summer, she had a 99.5% presence, being picked or banned in every game except for a single match. EU Summer Split, banned 20 times, picked 3 times, 100% presence, 100% win rate. it. At the NA playoffs, Kalista didn't make it through ban phase a single time. The NA and EU regional qualifiers? Well, I think you get it by now. For those of you new to the channel or not well versed in League history, there's something very important to make note of here. Many of these tournaments that I mentioned where Kalista had a huge presence or ban rate were after Gangplank and Fiora were reworked. If you're not familiar with these two monstrosities, you should watch my other video too. Slight spoilers for that video, Gangplank and Fiora were busted and there were many broken champions on the horizon. Even though these two champions were known for how strong they were at this point, Kalista was at least keeping up with them in terms of bans and overall presence. Occasionally, she even beat them in ban priority. That should tell you how strong Kalista was. This is why patch 5.13 would again nerf Kalista. One of the most obvious things about AD carries is that they scale with attack damage. If you gain 10 attack damage, your auto attack also increases by 10. Well, unless you're Kalista. This patch made it so that Kalista's basic attack scaled with 90% of her attack damage rather than 100%. This is a huge nerf to a type of champion that is usually known for scaling well throughout the game, and Riot was clearly trying to rein Kalista in before Worlds. For good measure, she received another nerf in patch 5.17 right before Worlds. The percent damage dealt by her W passive was lowered, and 30 seconds was added to her ult cooldown at rank 1. All of this was, of course, in preparation for Worlds 2015. And if you played back then, you already know what's coming. Because we're talking about 2015 League of Legends, and we're about to be talking about Worlds, it's impossible to not at least mention Juggernaut patch. I do have a 30-minute video covering this patch and its impact on Worlds, so I will keep it brief here. 4 champions were reworked in this patch. This means there were 6 recently reworked champions going into Worlds. Gangplank and Fiora were already known to be very strong due to past tournaments, but the regional finals that led into Worlds were played on a patch before the Juggernaut reworks were even released. This means that the pro players didn't really get to play with these champions in real tournaments until Worlds started. Kalista had dominated the pro scene in every single region for most of the year after her release. Pro play really needed some balancing. As a result, Riot decided to rework a bunch of champions right before Worlds. A bold move. This brings us to Worlds 2015, one of the wildest tournaments in League's history. This is the point where you expect me to talk about how Kalista dominated the Worlds meta. And there was a champion that did exactly that. Multiple, actually. But they weren't Kalista. Gangplank was banned in every game except 4, and he won all 4. Mordekaiser was banned in almost every game. Of the 5 he could be picked in, he was played in 4, and like Gangplank, won all 4. But what about Kalista? Well, she was the 6th most picked and banned champion of the tournament, with a 75% presence overall. And while this tournament is remembered especially for the rise of Gangplank, Mordekaiser, and Darius, she actually had a higher presence than Darius. Don't worry though, there's another Worlds tournament we'll be talking about later, where she had an even higher ban rate than Gangplank himself had managed. The question has to be asked though, how different would Worlds 2015 have been if the Juggernaut patch had not happened? It was a mess of a patch in terms of balance, sure, but it's possible that Kalista would have dominated the tournament without other broken champions pushing her out of the spotlight. People forget that Mordekaiser was reworked into a bot laner after all. He might have been the hero Kalista needed, and definitely not the one she deserved. After Worlds 2015, and especially because of the chokehold she had on pro play during the summer split, Kalista was nerfed again, heavily. Patch 5.22 tweaked Kalista's base stats and scalings, but more importantly, it changed her passive. It was now affected by attack speed slows. This meant that lowering her attack speed would not only reduce her damage a lot, but also her mobility. If her attack speed was reduced, so was her movement. 2 months later, right as the spring season of pro play was beginning, Kalista received yet another nerf.
Stop! Stop! It's me!
Her rend now refunded no mana at all when killing one single target, and instead required 2 targets to die for her to get a mana refund. This made her much more clunky to play in lane, especially for your average player. Many players did not like this change, because while Kalista was strong, it felt bad for a champion to be annoying to play as just for the sake of competitive balance. So, what was the overall impact of these changes? Did they finally succeed in taking Kalista out of the meta? Well, in the NA/LCS spring split, Kalista was the champion with the overall highest presence. Again, In the LCK, she was the second highest presence and the second most banned. Despite a barrage of nerfs, Kalista was still a dominant pick in pro play in all regions. Riot had to respond, and they did. They nerfed the cast range of her ultimate, but more importantly, her attack speed growth and base attack speed. To compensate, they gave her attack speed when near her Oathsworn ally to make her weaker in 1v1 while not nerfing her as hard in 2v2. She also lost 5% max health damage on her W passive at all ranks. In the aftermath of these huge nerfs, she would slowly disappear from pro play. By the summer split, she had mostly fallen out of the scene entirely. During Worlds 2016, Kalista made not one single appearance, 0 bans, and 0 picks. This might sound great, but there was still a problem with Kalista. People did want to play her. It feels really bad when there's a champion you really like, but Riot has to intentionally overnerf them for the sake of balance. She was a textbook case of a champion being too difficult to balance anywhere. If she was viable, pro play became the Kalista show. If she was unplayable in pro play, it also meant that she was too weak in solo queue. It was such an issue that in November of 2016, Riot released a blog post addressing it, called Buffing Kalista. In it, they responded to the community's feelings that Kalista was now unplayable. They said that Kalista was a classic case of balancing for top-level play conflicting with balance for the overall player base. They outlined that she was an extreme outlier of a champion and that she had over a 90% picker ban rate in pro play during the start of Season 6. And they don't even mention Season 5, which we went over earlier. Riot said that Kalista had now fallen completely out of pro play and was also too weak in general play too. They said that for long-term balance, they were in a rough spot. Her iconic features included unparalleled kiting, Rend being better than Smite for securing objectives, and her ultimate being used to protect the support from being caught out of place. As a result, they would have to pick and choose what aspects she would be allowed to keep. They compared her to Azir and noted that for champions like these, the difference between being permanently picked and simply being viable was either razor thin or didn't exist at all. They ended the post by saying that they planned to buff both champions in the preseason, and if it didn't work out, they would need to reevaluate the fundamental pieces of their kits to balance them for normal play while not ruining the pro scene. The preseason buffs for Kalista were designed to make her easier to play for average players. Her spares now stacked on enemies even while her E was on cooldown, and they made it so that her E would now refund mana as long as one unit was killed. This was essentially a revert of a previous nerf, and it did make her easier for average players. These were the only buffs that she received. During the NALCS, she appeared in 4 games and was banned once. In the LCK, she was picked once, and that was it. It might sound like this would be the end of Kalista's story, and she was finally, at least a little bit, balanced. Well, during the summer split, Kalista was back in every region. She wasn't the dominant pick, but she was picked a lot and was again getting banned. Her popularity increased with time, and during the EU summer playoffs, she was actually banned in every single game. And during the NA summer playoffs, Kalista was the most banned champion with over a 90% presence again. This was way after the preseason buffs, which, while nice for quality of life, were not really that important for pro players. Kalista was also being played with all kinds of supports at this point. Combined with an engaged support, she could be played to snowball the lane early, and once she had her ult, it was incredibly difficult to play against due to the range that they could now engage with. Combining a champion already built to engage with Kalista's tools was simply too much. Plus, she could always use it to save them if things went wrong. She brought so much to the team for really no downside. Not only was she great with engagers, she was very obnoxious paired with enchanters too. Sure, she only scaled with 90% attack damage, but she was too slippery to ever lock down and kill. This meant that she could stack those spears on anyone trying to kill her and eventually burst them down. It was frustrating enough to catch her without an enchanter, but add on the peel of a Lulu or Janna and it was just impossible to deal with. On top of that, she made it near impossible to ever kill her enchanter too. If you caught the enchanter out of place, Kalista would just save them with her ult. Plus that same ultimate could then be used to even further peel for Kalista, or even engage to turn a fight around. So, unsurprisingly, Kalista would appear in the patch notes again. Despite underperforming in solo queue, Riot had to find a way to nerf her for coordinated teams. 30 seconds added onto her ultimate at rank 1. Would this be enough to knock Kalista out of the meta? Kalista was banned in every single game of the Worlds 2017 main event, all 80 matches. The next closest to her was Galio at only 52 bans. At least Gangplank and Mordekaiser were picked at least a couple of times back in 2015. To this day, Kalista is still one of the only champions to ever be banned in every single game of a Worlds main event, the only other being Pantheon in 2019, who was freshly reworked. During the play-ins for Worlds 2017, Kalista had a 100% presence. She was banned in almost every game there too, being picked in the 5 games where she wasn't, and of those 5, she won 4. Plus, in one of those games, she got the first pentakill of the tournament.
Simon Prox walking a little bit too close to that brush, and he has no escape mechanisms left. Might be trying to use the ulti to escape, does do so for now. Walking away with the stone plate, but White Lotus unstoppable with the damage. Edward now going to be stunned up even through the Alistar ultimate.
Oh, they're diving.
He's still going to drop. In comes Seiya. The dunk into the ground. The double kill for White Lotus. The taunt comes through onto Kira. The triple for White Lotus, looking to make it even more. He's got the quadra.
Oh,
they're going to give it over. The pentakill for White Lotus.
But why was this even happening at all? The only real change recently was a massive nerf, and outside of that, she received no direct changes since the preseason. Well, the Worlds 2017 meta was defined by Ardent Censor. I do have an entire video covering it, so I'll be brief here. It was so strong that oftentimes you would hear the casters mention Ardent Censor when an enchanter was locked in, rather than the name of the actual champion being picked.
We do get Ardent Sensor here from RNG.
The item was honestly more important than the actual champion. At first, it might sound strange that a champion who scaled with only 90% attack damage on auto attacks would want an item designed to scale throughout the game. But Kalista loved Ardent for a bunch of reasons. Kalista was already hard to kill. Ardent Censor made her practically impossible to ever kill, and Kalista's ult made her Ardent Censor using Enchanter also extremely hard to kill. On top of that, the other champions that really liked the Ardent meta were generally weak early game. This meant that Kalista could also bully those champions. It is commonly believed that the sole reason that Kalista was permaban status during Worlds 2017 is because of Ardent Censor. While she definitely thrived in this meta, and it was a huge factor, it wasn't the only reason. Her popularity had started increasing during the Summer Pro season, and during this time, Ardent Censor was not being built every game. The meta supports were mostly Thresh and Braum, followed by Rakan and Tahm Kench. Of these champions, the only one to regularly build Ardent was Rakan, and even then, he often didn't. Janna and Lulu, the main Ardent users, were barely being played. Kalista wasn't a champion that was one-shotting everyone or annihilating every single game she was in, but she did fit both metas very well. She simply brought so much to the table, so many options, and so much utility that it was hard not to pick her. She made engaged champions better at engaging, she could make enchanters impossible to ever kill, and she could snowball earlier than any of the other meta AD carry champions. That's also completely ignoring the fact that she could secure objectives better than any jungler. She was already gaining popularity before the Ardent meta really took hold, and when it did, it boosted her even further. In the aftermath of Worlds 2017, at the start of the following season, Riot would make some more changes to Kalista. She lost 25 base range and received nerfs to her stats to make her weaker in the early game. They also, once again, nerfed her rend, making it so the mana refund was now 20 lower at rank 1, scaling back up to 30. This was again seen as a clunky change, and players really didn't like it. After these changes, Kalista did decline in popularity overall. She appeared only twice at Worlds 2018, and not a single time during Worlds 2019. In 2020, she had a 33% presence, but was only picked 8 times. Losing 6 of those games. And at Worlds 2021, she was picked just once. Finally, in 2022, she appeared more often than before, but she still wasn't a top pick. This would all change in 2023 when Kalista was once again the most banned champion at the Worlds main event. So how did this happen again? What was the cause this time? Well, patch 13.11 in June of 2023 reverted the nerf to her basic attack scaling. Instead of scaling with only 90% of attack damage, she once again scaled with 100%. Many of her base stats were buffed, and her rend cooldown was lowered. If Kalista is good enough to be picked, she probably will be, and this patch made her good enough to be picked. At Worlds 2024, she again had a pretty strong presence, being the 4th most banned champion overall. With Kalista's history at Worlds, and with her being a top pick in so many World Tournament metas, it's no surprise that she has collected the most bans. When Kalista is even occasionally picked as a support, you know that her kit is just that strong. And of course, a shout out to top lane Kalista Kalista too. Playing against ranged top laners is fun. In January 2025, she received more changes. Her Q and D were both nerfed, which lowered her early game power and ability to all-in. Riot did also, however, change her passive. Her base attack speed was increased, and they made it so that her mobility was now less affected by slows. The patch note said, "Trust us on this one." At LCK Cup 2025, Kalista has appeared in 89% of games. She's the second most banned right next to Skarner, and the next closest to her is Cassante, who is banned way less. This trend once more continues across regions. In the NLC 2025 Winter Playoffs, Kalista is the highest presence and most banned as well. This has led to Kalista returning again to her home in the patch notes, while making this video. I said that Kalista is overpowered right now, for both pro play and for any player who has learned to play her well. They aimed a nerf at competitive play, lowering the damage of her W passive.
Kalista, I mentioned earlier, Kalista is not actually pro-jailed. Kalista is OP purely by the numbers. Regardless of pro play. Now, would it force her hand? Probably not. She's not popular enough in solo queue to be like a mandatory nerf by any means, although, again, she would be a viable nerf target. The fact that she is the number 1 AD carry in pro play means that, plus by the numbers, she's clearly OP. Very easy nerf to go for. Now, that said, we're choosing a pretty pro-skewed nerf on Kalista.
And with that, we have covered the story of Kalista and her ongoing legacy in League. From release until now, and for who knows how much longer, Kalista will regularly be a top pick in competitive play. And time will tell if she will keep her title of most banned champion at Worlds after 2025. What do you think? Syndra is catching up after all. There are some champions, like Yuumi, that players generally hate to see in competitive play. But there are some players that really don't mind seeing Kalista picked very often, especially if she's locked in for her overall utility and not because her numbers are just tuned too high. I'm curious, what do you think about Kalista and her impact on the game? Is Kalista one of those champions for you that you hate to see locked in? Or do you actually like how often she's in the meta? Let me know down below, and let me know what champion you'd like me to cover next. Before finishing up, I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for supporting the channel. Every like or comment really does go a long way, and as always, thank you for watching.
I'm vengeance.